Hello, and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we're going to be talking about grief years later. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, what we're going to be talking about is grief down the line, years after whatever the loss is has occurred. In my dealings with my clients, either as a doula or as a grief coach, but more specifically in coaching, this is something we discuss right out the gate because I want to know why they're there and what their goals are, because my job as a coach, I'm not going to do the deep trauma work. I'm not going to look into what your mom did to you when you were a child that might cause the way you've reacted to your grief. That's what a psychiatrist will do. My goal is to find out what your goals are and help you get to them. That's where the problem comes in a lot of times. I will have a lot of people that come to me basically asking for a way to get over their grief. Now, if you've listened to even a single episode of my podcast before this one, then you'll know you don't get over your grief. I say it all the time. So that's a little piece of bad news I have to break to people a lot, is that you're never going to get over this. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. However, put a big however on this, it does change over time. So no, you're never going to not feel grief for whatever this loss was. It's very unlikely. Maybe you will, but it's very unlikely you won't still experience grief even years later. But it's different. It's going to change. Grief never stops. It changes. I've said that a million times. I feel like y'all listening are like, I know, Nikki. But that's just something I have to remind people of, especially people that don't know. A lot of times I'm working with somebody who has experienced their very first significant loss, and that can be very scary and challenging. So let's talk about grief down the line. Well, like I said, grief is one of those things that you're not going to get over. I say this, I'll just keep repeating it because it's true, but it's something that changes over time. And because of that, if you think of grief as a giant pit, a giant hole in the ground, and it turns into a chasm, very long chasm. So there's no way to walk around it. There's no way to jump over it. You have to walk through it to get to the other side. So you have to face your grief head on. Step one with any grieving process is knowing and accepting that, right? So grief years later, when our grief has started to change, or even just a few months later, a few weeks later, grief as it starts to occur down the line, there are some challenges involved. And this is where I tend to meet people as a grief coach either right after a grief because they're scared and they don't understand how to cope with this, or several months later when they are asking me why they're not getting past this and why it hurts just as bad as it did day one. Well, sometimes that's going to happen, but you'll start noticing challenges as you're trying to work through your grief. One big challenge, people will stop validating your loss. This is unfortunate and it's sad to me, and I talk about this and other times when your grief is yours. I mean, heck, I say that at the end of every single episode, your grief is yours, but your grief is yours, and other people will grieve in a different way. Or people who maybe weren't part of that loss that you were may not fully understand your grief and how it has impacted you. And they might at the beginning validate your feelings like, oh, you just suffered this loss. You must be going through so much. I'm so sorry. But there's this unfortunate societal belief that grief has a timeline and it should be over by a certain period of time. So that if you meet somebody who has lost, say, their spouse or a sibling, or it doesn't matter, when they have experienced a significant loss and 6 months to a year has gone by and they're still really grieving, a lot of other people might not understand that and think, why the heck are they not over this by now? Like, I've totally forgotten that loss happened. Well, that's because it didn't happen to that person. So you can't control that. You can't control what other people are thinking and feeling, unfortunately. You can only control what you're thinking and feeling. So knowing and accepting that people might view you differently is hard, but it's necessary. You might have people staring at you if you're still wearing all black and crying a lot over a loss. 2 years later, they might think, for the love of Pete, but you can't control that. That's how people are going to feel. you have every right to still hurt as much as you need to. And you have every right to continue to grieve as long as you need to. So how do we cope with this? Well, find people in a supportive community. This is why I'm always big on support groups. I've always found great validation in support groups because it's not just a place where I can go to talk about my losses, but to hear other people who have suffered something similar who might be feeling something I am, and it feels more validating. So maybe you're not getting that validation from your friends and family, but you might be able to find it in somebody else who gets it. So try finding a support group that might be a similar topic as your loss, or talk to a grief coach or a counselor or therapist so you have somebody who can validate those feelings for you. Because your feelings are valid. I say that at the end of every episode too. So, another challenge with grief down the road is you will have secondary losses. It's very likely at some point you're going to have another loss after your first significant loss. You might lose another relative. You might lose a friend, a pet, a job. I mean, a lot of losses can occur after that first one. And sometimes these secondary losses are a result of the primary loss. Maybe you lost a spouse and you're just really struggling to cope and you're missing a lot of work, so you lose your job. That's a big old double whammy that unfortunately happens a bit because so many companies aren't being supportive of their employees. And I'm not going to get on that soapbox right now, I promise. But there are other secondary losses or just natural progression of time. Other people and pets and things around you are probably going to pass at some point. But other secondary losses, maybe, again, we go back to that first thing, that first challenge of people not supporting your grief or not being validating. You might lose some friendships over this grief. And that's hard. That's sad. It's another loss. And each loss kind of compounds on the next one, right? Okay, well, what next? How do we deal with secondary losses? Well, there's no easy answer to that other than cope with it as best you can. You will have additional losses. You will have stumbles. You will have bad weeks. I will typically, the first time I meet with a client, I'll have them come up with a self-care plan. I may have mentioned that in a prior episode. I don't remember. But think about a self-care plan. What do you have going on that you know what works? I will have them write it out so they can pull it out when they have that bad day. But start a self-care plan so that when you have that bad day, you have something to turn to. Okay, another challenge over time. Losses, again, we talked about secondary losses, but losses will just continue to accumulate and you might lose a lot of your support system over time. As you think about significant losses in your middle age, as you age, you will probably lose friends and family to age, disease, illness. You might lose people around you. You will have new jobs. You might move. You will lose touch with people. All sorts of connections will slowly fade away. It's an unfortunate situation that happens to a lot of us. Things that remind you of the person or thing you've lost, you might push those away. Those might be things that were special to you. Maybe you lost your spouse, so you can't live in the home you guys lived in together anymore. And again, going back to that first one, you might lose some friends. You might lose some people around you because they're not validating your feelings any longer. So what do we do about this? Well, first of all, understand and accept that if people leave your life, there's nothing much you can do about that, right? If that's the choice they've made, if that's a choice that they have made, then you just have to accept it, right? But this isn't saying you have to never have friends again. You can still have friends. I talked earlier about grief support groups. You might meet somebody there you get a great connection with, but don't be afraid to get out and join a club, join a group, find an activity you really like. For example, I'm very, very into hiking. I love hiking and backpacking. And I actually made a great friend that I continue to hike with to this day from one of the hiking groups. They have weekly, bi-weekly, they just do group hikes. And they say, everybody, if you want to come, meet here at this time. And I met her there and we connected really well. And we still hike together quite a bit. I helped her move. We're good friends at this point. So don't be afraid to get out and meet other people if you can. Or meet people at places you already go. Your church, if you go to any type of community center, gym, things like that. Don't be afraid to make new connections. Just because you've lost some, it doesn't mean you can't have new ones form. So one last challenge we tend to face with loss is our memories. Our memories of the thing or person that we have lost sometimes get cloudy. They change, they distort, they become a little more abstract. I talk about my brother a lot in this podcast and how he passed away back in 2015. And there are certain memories just tend to change and morph a little over time in general about anything. But I know a lot of people express a fear like, I'm going to forget this person. I'm going to forget what their laugh sounded like. I'm going to forget their smile. And you might. It might happen or you might not. I can still very clearly hear my brother's voice in my head. I can hear his laugh and I can hear what he sounds like when he would say, "Hey, sis," because he always said, "Hey, sis," when he talked to me. I can hear that. I don't know if I'll ever not hear it, but you might lose a little bit of clarity on some of these memories. I won't say you'll lose them. You'll never forget the person or thing you lost. I promise you won't. If they impacted you so much that you're grieving this hard, there's no way you'll forget them. Your memories of them might change and shape over time or fade a little, like some of the details might go away, but you'll never truly fully forget somebody. Now, there have been tons of studies I've seen and read and heard of about sensory memory, like sounds and feels and smells, things like that, that you only remember them for a few seconds or a couple minutes or whatever. Your exact memory of it, yeah, it might go away almost immediately. But memories are based, at least to me, this is anecdotal, I'm not quoting any studies, don't quote me on this. To me, memories are more of an experience. I remember a feel. You remember more how you felt about something than my husband and I did a beautiful hike at Pictured Rocks in Upper Michigan. And if you haven't heard of Pictured Rocks, Google it real quick. It's amazing. It is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I can remember that it was absolutely stunningly beautiful. Can I remember each tiny little notch of the rocks we looked at? No, of course I can't. I can remember one sticking out a certain way and there's a little arch at the end of it. I can remember that it looked like that, but I don't remember every single little detail. I couldn't tell you the exact shade of blue the water was, but I can tell you the water was blue, which when you think about any of the Great Lakes, you don't necessarily think of them as having blue water, but Lake Superior is very different. And I just remember the water being very blue. But no, I can't tell you the exact shade. Of course not. I could look at it and turn away and still not tell you the exact shade. But I remember that hike because we had a lovely time. We met some really cool people along the way. We had just a beautiful hike. It was lovely. We took a billion pictures I could look at if I want to, but I don't have to remember every single detail of every rock I looked at to remember that I loved that trip. And that's how it is with our losses too. Maybe you don't remember that one freckle that was on the left cheek of your person that you've lost, or you don't remember exactly how their eyebrows arched. It doesn't matter. You remember how they made you feel, and you remember how they held space in your life. And that's what's important, right? Okay. Now we know a little bit more about what we can, I don't want to say look forward to, but what we have ahead of us in our grief journey. It's not all going to be puppies and kittens and rainbows. It's going to be hard, and it's not going to go away. We know that. It will get easier over time, and it will change. And I guarantee you're going to have days, even years down the road, where it's going to hit you and it's going to hit you hard. My brother has been gone 8 years now, coming up on 9, I think. And I still have days every now and then where it's a gut punch all over again. It feels almost as painful as the first day. My beautiful cat I talk about all the time. She's my best friend in the world. Overall, I handle it much better now than I did day one. But I have days where it's like I remember one small thing, or I see a photo or something and it hits me real hard and it hurts. It hurts just as bad as day one. But those days are fewer and further in between, and I can cope with them better. Even if it does hit me, it's not as deeply soul-sucking, to put it bluntly, as it was day one. It still hurts. It still hurts a lot. But I now have had years to work on my grief. So I have the skills, I have the knowledge, I have what's there. And you will too. So now is the time where we pull a card from the Death Deck. Woo! All right, I'm going to shuffle the cards. Hey, have you found me on Patreon yet? You should come check me out, patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. You can try being a patron free for 7 days. That's right, it's free for 7 days. So come check that out. Then you can see that I'm amazing and you want to keep supporting me. Okay. Now, today's question. While you are on vacation, someone close to you dies. You, A, want to know immediately. B, would rather not know until I get back. Or C, whatever the people back home decide is fine with me. Ooh, that's a good one. I often had fears and worries about my cat when we go on vacations. I'd always have somebody come check in on her, feed her, whatever. But I would absolutely have that fear that I'm like, I'm going to leave and she's going to die. And then she's going to sit there for days. And yeah, anyway. But if I were to, I know there's that indication, like when you find out about a loss and somebody that might be impacted by that is on vacation, it's like, do I tell them? Should I not bother them? And that's hard. For me personally, so everybody knows, if I am on vacation and somebody close to me dies, go ahead and tell me immediately. I'd rather know. Yeah, I might be bummed that I might have to end this vacation early or continue the vacation while being very sad. I would still rather know immediately than find out when I get back. So tell me immediately. That's how I am. What about you? I want to know. Would you want to be told, or would you rather be left alone until your vacation's done? And I'll put the caveat in, like, yeah, it depends on who it is, or what. I know that might sound callous, but like, if it's my mom, tell me right away. If it's a third cousin that I haven't seen or heard from in 2 decades, I mean, that could probably wait, I guess. I think a little bit of it depends. But overall, just go ahead and tell me. It's fine. All right, guys. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. You can find me on the socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all Nikki the Death Doula. So please come follow me there. I would love to hear from you about your answer to the Death Deck, your thoughts on this episode or any of my episodes. But more than anything, I would love to have you come join me over on patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. Got some great stuff over there. If they're not already available now, I will be giving free access to some workshops I am making currently for my patrons. So that's another perk you'll get. If you're a patron of the $10 or more per month, then you will get free access to my workshops and other things I might put out there in the universe down the road. I've got a lot of plans, you guys. Anyway, as you know, I am doing all this full time, and I do rely on this income to help me provide some pro bono service where I can. So patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. Okay, that's enough. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you have an absolutely amazing week. And as always, your grief is yours. Your feelings are valid. And grief doesn't always have to suck.